Have you ever felt a knot of dread tighten in your stomach? A sense of injustice so sharp it steals your breath? This isn't a story about a simple misunderstanding. It's about a moment when the hum of an airport terminal transformed into an arena of prejudice, where a young man's dreams were nearly shattered by a single uniformed woman's bitter assumptions. We're about to pull back the curtain on a confrontation at Gate B-24 that ignited a firestorm, a clash that would echo from the sterile floors of JFK, all the way to the hushed boardroom of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. This is the story of how a pair of cold, steel handcuffs on the wrists of a 17-year-old boy triggered an avalanche of karma so swift and so devastating, it would change an entire industry forever. Stay with me. The Air and John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of chaos, a blend of rolling suitcase wheels, multilingual announcements, and the low, anxious murmur of thousands of intersecting journeys. For 17-year-old Jamal Vance, it was a soundscape of promise. Tucked into his ears were earbuds playing a lo-fi instrumental, a calming counterpoint to the terminal's frantic energy. He clutched his boarding pass for Apex Air Flight 1 and 10 to London Heathrow, a flimsy piece of paper that represented the first step toward his future. On his back, a worn gray backpack held his laptop and a well-thumbed textbook on aeronautical propulsion. Over his lanky frame, he wore a simple black hoodie, the letters MIT emblazoned across the chest in white and cardinal red. Not as a boast, but as a tangible reminder of the dream he was chasing, he was flying first class. It was a rare indulgence, a gift from his father for finishing his advanced summer program with distinction. Jamal usually flew coach, preferring the anonymity, but his dad, Robert, had insisted. "A taste of the world you're going to help build, son," he'd said. Jamal felt a bit self-conscious about it, as if the plush seat and extra legroom were a costume he hadn't yet earned. He just wanted to get on the plane, settle in with his book, and lose himself in the elegant physics of flight. He approached the boarding gate, B-24, where a queue was already forming. The gate agent, a woman with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Karen Miller, was orchestrating the process with the grim efficiency of a drill sergeant. Her voice, amplified by the gate's PA system, was sharp and devoid of warmth. "We will now begin pre-boarding for our first-class passengers. Please have your boarding pass and identification ready." Jamal shuffled forward, pulling his passport and ticket from his pocket. When his turn came, he offered them with a polite smile. "Good morning." Karen Miller's eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, flickered from his face, down to his MIT hoodie, and then to the first-class designation on his ticket. The briefest of hesitations, a microscopic tightening at the corners of her mouth, was the first sign of the storm to come. It was a look Jamal had seen before, a subtle but unmistakable recalibration of perception. It was the look that questioned his presence in a space she felt he didn't belong. "Passport and boarding pass," she clipped, her tone already several degrees cooler than it had been for the elderly couple in front of him. He held them out. She snatched them from his hand, her painted nails clicking against the passport cover. Her gaze lingered on his photo, then back to his face, a silent, accusatory cross-examination. She scanned the boarding pass, then scanned it again. The machine beeped its cheerful, affirmative tone, but Karen's expression soured further, as if the computer's compliance was a personal betrayal. "There seems to be a problem with your ticket, young man," she said, her voice loud enough for the people behind him to hear. Jamal's brow furrowed. "A problem? It was booked a few weeks ago. Is everything okay?" "I'll be the judge of that," she retorted, her fingers tapping a furious staccato on her keyboard. The screen's glow cast harsh shadows on her face. "This is a first-class ticket. It's highly unusual for someone your age to be traveling in this cabin alone on a full-fare ticket." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Someone who looks like you." Jamal felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. He forced himself to stay calm, to keep his voice even. His father had always taught him that in moments of conflict, the person who maintains their composure holds the power. "It was a gift," he explained softly, "for completing a school program." Karen let out a short, incredulous puff of air that wasn't quite a laugh. "A school program, right." She held up his passport, angling it as if it were a curious artifact. Jamal Vance, is this your legal name? Yes, ma'am. And you're 17? Yes, ma'am. His polite, clipped answers seemed only to fuel her suspicion. She was building a narrative in her head, and every piece of evidence he presented was being twisted to fit it. The hoodie wasn't a symbol of academic ambition, it was a disguise. His youth wasn't a sign of a bright future, it was a red flag for delinquency. His first-class ticket wasn't a gift, it was an impossibility, likely the product of a stolen credit card or some elaborate scam. A man in a tailored suit standing behind Jamal, a Mr. Harrison, cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low baritone. "Is there an issue? We're going to miss our slot if we don't keep the line moving." Karen shot him a venomous glare. "I am following Apex Air Security protocols, sir. I'm sure you'd rather be safe than sorry." She turned her attention back to Jamal, her eyes narrowing. "I'm going to need you to step aside, please. I need to verify this ticket with my supervisor." She didn't move to call a supervisor. She simply motioned him to the side of the podium, a public shaming ground next to the stanchions. Jamal, his face burning with humiliation, did as he was told. He watched as she began processing other first-class passengers, greeting them with a strained but passable smile. A white family with 2 young children, a businessman in his 50s, a young woman with a designer handbag, all were waved through without a second glance. The contrast was a slap in the face. He was the anomaly. He was the threat. The lo-fi beat in his ears was gone, replaced by the frantic pounding of his own heart. The dream of London, of a future in the skies, was rapidly souring into a familiar terrestrial nightmare. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Jamal stood in his designated spot of shame, feeling the curious, pitying, and sometimes suspicious glances of the other passengers. The rest of the first-class cabin boarded. Then the business-class passengers. He could hear the tinny announcement for Zone 1 boarding. His plane was filling up, and he was still marooned at the gate, an exhibit in Karen Miller's personal museum of suspicion. He tried to catch her eye, to ask for an update, but she ignored him with a theatrical focus on her computer screen. Her initial aggression had cooled into a smug, dismissive certainty. In her mind, his guilt was already proven. All that remained was the formality of its confirmation. Mr. Harrison, the businessman who had spoken up earlier, had finished boarding, but now reappeared at the entrance of the jet bridge, his expression etched with concern. He walked back to the podium. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm but respectful, "my name is Jonathan Harrison. I'm an Apex Air Platinum Elite member. I've flown over 3 million miles with this airline. I watched your entire interaction with this young man. He was polite, he presented valid identification, and your machine approved his ticket. What precisely is the protocol you are claiming to follow?" Karen's face, already a mask of sour authority, tightened. Being questioned by a high-value customer was not part of her plan. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a staff matter. It involves passenger security and potential fraudulent activity. I can't discuss the details." "Potential fraud?" Harrison countered, his voice rising slightly. "Based on what? He's a black kid in a hoodie with an expensive ticket? Is that the new criteria in the Apex Security Manual? Because if it is, I'd like to see it in writing." The accusation, now spoken aloud, electrified the air. A few other passengers waiting to board murmured amongst themselves. Karen's composure finally cracked. Her face flushed a blotchy red. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and trembling with fury. "I am a 14-year veteran with this airline. I am responsible for the safety of everyone on that aircraft. This young man's documentation is inconsistent. He is being evasive." "He has been nothing but respectful," Harrison shot back. "You, on the other hand, have been accusatory and unprofessional from the moment you saw him." Jamal wanted to shrink into the floor. He appreciated the man's defense, but the escalating confrontation was drawing more attention, cementing his status as the center of a problem. He just wanted it to be over. "It's okay, sir," Jamal said, finding his voice. "I'm sure we can clear this up." His attempt to de-escalate was like gasoline on a fire for Karen. She saw it as a confession, a weak attempt to wriggle out of her grasp. "No, it's not okay," she snapped, turning on him. "You've been standing here, refusing to cooperate." "You told me to stand here and wait," Jamal said, his own voice now tinged with a desperate frustration. "You haven't asked me any other questions. What do you need? My student ID? My dad's contact information? I can give you anything you need to verify the ticket. This offer of transparency was the final proof she needed. A real scammer would be trying to run. A real scammer wouldn't offer up more information. Her biased logic, however, was inverted. To her, his offer was a bluff, a sign of panic. "I've heard enough," she declared, her eyes gleaming with a strange, vindictive triumph. She picked up the phone at her station, her back to Jamal and Mr. Harrison. Her words were hushed, but her intent was clear. A moment later, she placed the receiver back in its cradle and looked directly at Jamal. "Airport security is on its way," she announced, her voice resonating with an unnerving satisfaction. "We'll get this sorted out now." A collective gasp went through the remaining passengers in the queue. Airport security. The words landed like stones in the pit of Jamal's stomach. It was no longer about a misunderstanding or a delayed flight. It had escalated into a realm of criminality, of uniformed officers and implied threats. The simple act of trying to board a plane had somehow led him here. Mr. Harrison looked apoplectic. "You called security? On a 17-year-old kid? This is an unbelievable abuse of your authority." "It's my duty," Karen said, puffing out her chest. She had crossed the Rubicon. In for a penny, in for a pound. She would be vindicated. She would be the hero who stopped a potential crime, who trusted her instincts over the politically correct niceties that men like Harrison wanted to champion. From the far end of the concourse, Jamal saw them. Two Port Authority police officers, their dark blue uniforms a stark contrast to the bright, airy terminal. They walked with a purpose that made people instinctively part ways. One was a broad-shouldered man with a military-style haircut, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. The other, slightly younger, had a more cautious and observant demeanor. The hum of the airport seemed to fade. The world narrowed to the approaching uniforms, the triumphant smirk on Karen Miller's face, and the cold, sickening dread that was now flooding every inch of Jamal's body. The two officers arrived at the gate, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from tense to critical. The taller officer, whose name tag identified him as Donovan, addressed Karen with a clipped, "What's the situation, ma'am?" "Officer, thank goodness," Karen began, her voice a carefully crafted performance of a concerned employee under duress. "This individual," she said, gesturing to Jamal without looking at him, "is attempting to board a flight to London with a fraudulent first-class ticket. His story is inconsistent. He's become agitated, and he refuses to cooperate. I'm concerned for the safety of the crew and passengers." Every word was a distortion, a weaponized exaggeration. Inconsistent story for his simple explanation, agitated for his quiet frustration, refusing to cooperate for his silent obedience to her command to wait. Jamal's mind reeled. He felt like he was watching a play about someone else, a character in a drama he hadn't auditioned for. Officer Donovan's eyes, hard and flat, settled on Jamal. It was the same look Karen had given him, but backed by the full weight of the law. He saw the hoodie, the race, the youth, and connected the dots with Karen's fabricated narrative. "Son, I need to see your ID," Donovan said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Jamal numbly handed over his passport again. Donovan took it, flipping through the pages with a dismissive air. "And the ticket?" Jamal handed that over too. The second officer, Chen, stood slightly behind Donovan, his eyes scanning the faces in the small crowd that had gathered, his expression unreadable. "The ticket appears valid," Chen noted quietly, peering over his partner's shoulder. "It's scanned through the system." "The system can be fooled," Karen interjected, unwilling to let facts derail her story. "The credit card used to purchase it is probably stolen. He won't give me any information to verify it." "That's not true," Jamal finally burst out, his voice cracking. "I offered to give you my dad's number. I offered you my student ID." "See?" Karen said to Donovan, her eyebrows raised. Agitated. Donovan held up a hand, silencing Jamal. "All right, that's enough. Let's take a walk, kid. We can sort this out away from all the drama." "Where are you taking him?" Mr. Harrison demanded, stepping forward again. "He hasn't done anything wrong. You have no cause to detain him." Donovan's head snapped toward Harrison. "Sir, this is an active security situation. I need you to step back onto the jet bridge or leave the gate area, now." His hand moved from his side and rested pointedly on his belt. The message was clear. Harrison, a man who undoubtedly commanded respect in boardrooms and conference calls, seemed to deflate slightly, recognizing the immovable object he was up against. He gave Jamal a helpless, apologetic look before retreating. "Let's go," Donovan said, giving Jamal a slight nudge on the shoulder. Jamal's feet felt like lead. "Can I just call my dad? He can clear this all up in 2 minutes. His name is Robert Vance." Donovan and Karen exchanged a look. It was a look of shared, cynical amusement. Robert Vance. The name meant nothing to them. Just another name. Another part of the lie. "You'll get your phone call," Donovan said dismissively. "Down at the office. We're not going to do it here." He started to lead Jamal away from the gate. But Jamal, in a moment of panic and a desperate attempt to reclaim a shred of his dignity, instinctively pulled his arm back. "Please," he said, his voice pleading, "just listen to me." That was the mistake, the tiny act of resistance. In a motion so fast it blurred, Donovan grabbed Jamal's arm, twisted it behind his back, and pushed him against the side of the boarding podium. Gasps erupted from the onlookers. "Stop resisting!" Donovan barked, his voice booming in the suddenly silent gate area. "I'm not resisting," Jamal cried out, his face pressed against the cool laminate of the counter. Officer Chen took a half step forward. "Donovan, maybe we just walk him down." "He's a flight risk, unpredictable," Donovan grunted, already pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. The world seemed to slow down. Jamal could hear the metallic rasp as the cuffs were opened. He felt the cold, unyielding steel encircle his right wrist, then the left, and then the final sickening sound that would be seared into his memory forever, the sharp, definitive click of the lock engaging. Humiliation, hot and absolute, washed over him. He was 17 years old, an aspiring engineer, a son, a student, and now he was a spectacle, a black teenager in handcuffs at an international airport, accused of a crime he didn't commit, surrounded by strangers who would only remember this single damning image. The weight of the steel on his wrist was nothing compared to the crushing weight of the injustice. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the staring faces, the whispers, the silent judgments. Karen Miller stood watching, her arms crossed, a thin, satisfied smile on her lips. She had won. They led him through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," leaving the public theater of the boarding gate behind for the sterile, anonymous corridors of the airport's underbelly. The walk was a blur of fluorescent lights and polished concrete floors. Jamal's mind, a place usually filled with complex equations and aerodynamic designs, was now a frantic loop of fear and disbelief. The handcuffs chafed his wrists, a constant biting reminder of his powerlessness. The security office was a small, windowless box, smelling faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. It contained a metal desk, a few chairs, and a wall of flickering CCTV monitors. Donovan pushed Jamal into one of the chairs with unnecessary force. "Empty your pockets. Put everything on the desk," Donovan commanded. Jamal, his hands cuffed behind his back, looked at him incredulously. "How am I supposed to do that?" Officer Chen, who had been silent and visibly uncomfortable throughout the ordeal, stepped forward. "I'll do it, Don." He carefully retrieved Jamal's wallet and phone, placing them on the desk. "Look, let's just run his ID and call it in. The flight is going to be taking off." Donovan ignored him, his focus on the phone. "Who were you going to call? Your lawyer? Your gang leader?" he sneered. Jamal's fear was hardening into a cold, defiant anger. He looked Donovan straight in the eye. "My father," he said, his voice steady. "You said I could have one phone call." Donovan laughed. "Fine, one call. Make it quick." Chen placed the phone on the desk in front of Jamal. With his hands still cuffed, it was an impossible task. Chen let out an exasperated sigh, unlocked the cuffs, and then recuffed Jamal's hands in front of him. The small gesture of decency felt monumental. Jamal's fingers trembled as he navigated to his contacts and pressed the first name on his favorites list. Dad. 57 floors above the streets of Midtown Manhattan, Robert Vance stood before a long, mahogany table in the Apex Air corporate headquarters. The room offered a panoramic view of the city, but the dozen executives seated at the table were focused only on him. He was in the middle of a crucial presentation, detailing a 5-year, $100 million initiative to enhance diversity in the company's pilot and executive training programs. "It's not just about optics," Robert was saying, his voice calm and commanding, the voice of a man accustomed to shaping futures from 30,000 feet and from the C-suite. "It's about reflecting the world we serve. It's about ensuring that a young person, no matter their background, can look at an Apex cockpit and see a future for themselves." His phone, set to vibrate on the podium, buzzed insistently. He glanced down. Jamal. His brow furrowed in annoyance. Jamal knew he was in a board meeting. This had to be important. "Excuse me for one moment, gentlemen," Robert said smoothly, not betraying a hint of his irritation. He stepped through a side door into his private office, the skyline of New York sprawling before him. He answered the call. "Jamal, everything okay? You should be boarding by now." "Dad." Jamal's voice was strained, tight with an emotion Robert couldn't immediately place. It sounded like fear. A cold knot formed in Robert's gut. "I'm at JFK, gate B24. There's a problem with my ticket." Robert's mind immediately went to logistics. A booking error? A system glitch? "Put the gate agent on the phone, son. I'll clear it up." There was a pause, and then Jamal's voice came back, lower this time, almost a whisper. "I can't. They brought me to a security office. Dad, they put me in handcuffs." The words seemed to suck the air out of the vast, luxurious office. Handcuffs. The two words disconnected Robert Vance, the powerful CEO, and connected Robert Vance, the father of a black son. It was the call he had always dreaded, the one he and his wife had prepared Jamal for, with countless conversations about how to behave, how to de-escalate, how to survive an encounter born of prejudice. Robert's entire demeanor shifted. The warm, charismatic corporate leader vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. His voice dropped, losing all its previous warmth, becoming as precise and unforgiving as a shard of ice. "Jamal, listen to me very carefully. Are you hurt?" "No, just scared." "I know, now tell me, who is with you?" "Two Port Authority officers and the gate agent. Her name is Karen." Robert's fingers were already flying across the keyboard of his computer, his other hand holding the phone to his ear. He typed JFK B24 Apex staff into the company's internal directory. A list of names and photos appeared. He scanned down. Miller, Karen. "Don't say another word to them, Jamal. Don't answer any questions. Just sit there. Do you understand?" "Yes, Dad. I want you to know that this is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. This will be over soon." He hung up. The silence in his office was absolute. He stared at Karen Miller's smiling corporate headshot on his screen for a long, chilling moment. Then he jabbed the intercom button on his desk. "Suzanne," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Cancel the rest of my day. Get me Richard Sterling from legal, Maria Flores from operations, and have my car at the front entrance in 3 minutes. We're going to JFK, now." He walked back into the boardroom. The executives looked up, expecting him to resume. "Gentlemen," Robert Vance said, his eyes sweeping across the room, his face a mask of controlled fury. "The presentation on our new diversity initiative is over. We're moving on to a live-action demonstration." Back in the windowless room at JFK, the atmosphere had soured. Donovan, impatient and arrogant, was trying to get a rise out of Jamal. "So, who's this Robert Vance?" he taunted. "Some hotshot lawyer who's gonna sue us? We've heard that one before, kid." Jamal, holding on to his father's instructions like a lifeline, remained silent, his eyes fixed on a scuff mark on the floor. Karen Miller had come back from the gate, her duty done, the last of the passengers boarded. The flight to London was now closing its doors. She stood in the doorway of the security office, arms crossed, observing the interrogation with a proprietary air. "His flight's gone," she announced with satisfaction. "We'll have to book him on the next one, assuming his ticket is even real. And he'll be paying the fare difference, of course." Suddenly, Officer Chen's radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice was uncharacteristically urgent. All units at Terminal 4, be advised. Port Authority Chief of Operations, Anthony Rossi, is en route to your location. ETA 2 minutes. Donovan's smug expression faltered. The chief? What the hell is he coming down here for? Before he could speculate further, his own cell phone rang. It was his precinct captain. Donovan's face went from confused to pale as he listened. His responses clipped and subservient. Yes, sir. No, sir. I understand, sir. He hung up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at Jamal, then at Karen, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a dawning horror. The door to the office burst open. It wasn't the chief of operations. It was a woman in a sharp Apex Air uniform, her face white as a sheet. Jamal recognized her from the pictures in his father's office. Maria Flores, the executive vice president of North American operations. She was one of the most powerful people in the company, and she looked terrified. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. Her eyes landed on Jamal, cuffed in the chair, and a pained expression crossed her face. Then she saw Karen Miller. "You!" Maria hissed. "What did you do?" Karen, bewildered by the sudden appearance of a top executive, stammered. "Ma'am, I was just following protocol. This passenger was a security risk." "Security risk?" A new voice cut through the room, cold and clear as a winter morning. The group parted as Robert Vance stepped into the doorway. He wasn't wearing a suit and tie, but a tailored blazer and dark slacks that radiated more power than any uniform. He was flanked by another man in an expensive suit whom Jamal recognized as the airline's chief legal counsel, Richard Sterling. Robert's eyes, however, were only for his son. He walked directly to Jamal, ignoring everyone else in the room as if they were furniture. He knelt down, his gaze softening as he took in the sight of his son in handcuffs. "Are you okay, Jamal?" Jamal could only nod, a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. Robert's eyes then drifted to the steel cuffs on his son's wrists. He looked up, his gaze falling upon Officer Donovan. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Get these off my son, now." The command was absolute. Donovan, fumbling with the keys, rushed forward to unlock the cuffs. The click of their release was a sound of liberation, the polar opposite of the sound that had sealed Jamal's fate less than an hour ago. Jamal rubbed his raw wrists, the red marks a stark testament to his ordeal. Robert helped Jamal to his feet and put a protective arm around his shoulder. Only then did he turn his attention to the rest of the room. His gaze was glacial. He looked at Maria Flores. "Maria, you have 30 seconds to explain to me why my son was handcuffed at one of our gates." Maria looked like she was about to be physically ill. "Robert, I swear, I just found out. The alert came from your office. Robert's eyes shifted to Karen Miller, who now looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Her face had drained of all color. The name Vance on the boy's passport suddenly connected in her brain with the name of the man who signed her paychecks. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. "You," Robert said, his voice dangerously quiet, "your name is Karen Miller." It wasn't a question. She nodded weakly, unable to form words. "Ms. Miller," Robert continued, his tone dripping with ice. "My son was flying to London to tour the Rolls-Royce aviation facility, a trip I arranged for him as a reward for securing a provisional scholarship to MIT's aerospace engineering program, a program for which he is currently ranked third in his incoming class. He was not a security risk. He was a passenger, a first-class passenger, our customer, and my son." He took a step closer. Karen flinched. "I have spent the last 5 years and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to build Apex Air into an airline that stands for respect, dignity, and inclusion. And in the space of 10 minutes, with your petty prejudices and your pathetic abuse of a minuscule amount of authority, you have burned that work to the ground." He then turned to the 2 police officers. Officer Chen was looking at the floor, shame written all over his face. Officer Donovan was trying to appear defiant, but a sheen of sweat covered his brow. "And you," Robert said to Donovan, "you put your hands on my child. You put him in cuffs based on the hysterical lies of a single employee without a shred of evidence. Your body camera was active, I presume. Donovan paled even further. Yes, sir. Excellent, Robert said with a smile that held no warmth. Our legal team will be filing a formal request for that footage within the hour, along with a complaint for false arrest and excessive force with the Port Authority. I believe Chief Rossi is on his way down. I suggest you start thinking about your statement. The room was silent, thick with the stench of ruined careers. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been upended by a tidal wave. Jamal, standing under his father's arm, watched the woman who had humiliated him and the man who had bound him completely crumble. It wasn't a feeling of triumph. It was a strange, hollow feeling, the quiet after a violent storm. The damage was already done. The retribution that followed was not a single, explosive event. It was a cascade, a series of precise, calculated, and devastating consequences that rippled out from the epicenter of Gate B24. Robert Vance did not operate with loud theatrical anger. He operated with the cold, unforgiving precision of a surgeon excising a cancer. The first and most immediate consequence was for Karen Miller. She was not simply fired. That would have been too easy, too clean. As she stood there trembling in the security office, Maria Flores handed her a letter. It stated that she was suspended indefinitely, pending a full internal investigation. She was to surrender her airport credentials and be escorted from the premises immediately. Her career with Apex Air was over, but her public nightmare was just beginning. Robert Vance's legal and PR teams worked through the night. They didn't try to bury the story, they seized control of it. The next morning, a press release was issued by Apex Air. It didn't mention that the victim was the CEO's son. It simply stated that a deeply disturbing incident of racial profiling involving a minor had occurred at JFK, that the employee responsible had been suspended, and that Mr. Vance was personally overseeing a root and branch review of all customer-facing security and service protocols. Then came the leak. An anonymous source, likely from Robert's own office, provided key details to a reporter at a major newswire service. The story broke, and it was explosive. Gate agent handcuffs black teenager in hoodie. Teen revealed to be airline CEO's son. The detail about the MIT hoodie was the perfect, ironic touch. Karen Miller's name was mentioned. Her face, sourced from her now-deleted social media, was everywhere. The internal investigation Robert launched was merciless. They pulled her file and found a pattern. 3 prior passenger complaints over the last 4 years, all involving minority travelers, all citing her hostile and accusatory demeanor. They had all been dismissed by a local HR manager as customer service disagreements. That HR manager was also fired. The investigation concluded that Karen had violated 17 different company policies, from the code of conduct to specific security escalation procedures. Her termination for cause was made public, and Apex Air announced they would be contesting her unemployment claim. She was blacklisted, not just from Apex, but from the entire industry. No airline would touch her. The name Karen Miller became a verb in airline employee forms, a cautionary tale about the career-ending consequences of prejudice. For Officer Donovan, the karma was more bureaucratic, but no less brutal. The formal complaint filed by Robert Vance, a man who had the city's top law firms on speed dial, landed on the Port Authority chief's desk with the force of a thunderclap. The body camera footage was exactly as damning as Robert had predicted. It showed Jamal's calm demeanor, Karen's escalating hysteria, Mr. Harrison's attempts to intervene, and Donovan's unwarranted aggression. It clearly captured Jamal's non-resistance before being slammed against the podium. Donovan was placed on immediate administrative leave. The internal affairs investigation was swift. He was found guilty of excessive force, abuse of authority, and failure to de-escalate. He was stripped of his coveted airport post and reassigned to overnight duty at a remote Port Authority storage facility in New Jersey. A career graveyard. He kept his job but lost his reputation, his seniority, and any hope of promotion. His partner, Officer Chen, provided a detailed, honest testimony against him. Chen received a formal reprimand for not intervening sooner, but was ultimately cleared, his willingness to tell the truth noted in his file. But Robert Vance's true focus was on the system itself. He knew that firing Karen and punishing Donovan was treating the symptoms, not the disease. 2 weeks after the incident, he called an all-hands press conference. He stood before the cameras, not as a vengeful father, but as a CEO shouldering a profound responsibility. He announced the Apex Air Dignity Promise. It was a complete overhaul of employee training, developed in partnership with the NAACP and a leading civil rights advocacy group. It included mandatory, recurring implicit bias training, de-escalation workshops taught by social psychologists, and a new zero-tolerance policy for profiling of any kind. He introduced a new digital reporting system where passengers could instantly file complaints from the Apex app, with every submission being reviewed by a newly created independent civilian oversight committee. He also announced the Vance Future Flyers Fund, a $25 million scholarship endowment seeded with his own money to help underprivileged students and students of color pursue careers in aviation, from piloting and engineering to air traffic control and airline management. He used the incident involving his own son not just to clean his own house, but to set a new standard for the entire industry. Other airlines, fearing similar PR disasters, quickly began reviewing their own policies. The events at Gate B24 had become a catalyst, a painful but necessary inflection point that forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. The karma had not just hit back at the individuals, it had hit back at the complacent system that had allowed them to flourish. 3 months later, the autumn chill had settled over New York City. The media frenzy had subsided, replaced by industry journals analyzing the Apex model of crisis response. In the Vance's spacious apartment overlooking Central Park, the incident was no longer a raw wound, but a scar that was beginning to fade. Jamal sat across from his father at the dining table, a laptop open between them. They were reviewing the schematics of a new generation jet engine. The easy, comfortable silence between them was deeper now, forged in the crucible of that day at the airport. Jamal was quieter, more observant. The incident hadn't broken his spirit, but it had tempered it, stripping away the last vestiges of youthful naivete. He understood now that the world he wanted to enter, a world of elegant physics and boundless skies, was still tethered to the ugly, complicated gravity of human prejudice. "The composite fan blades on this model are incredible," Jamal murmured, tracing a line on the screen. "The weight reduction alone must improve fuel efficiency by at least 15%. Robert smiled. 16.2%, actually. The lead engineer on that project, Dr. Alistair Finch, is the man you'll be meeting at the Rolls-Royce facility next month." Jamal looked up. They had, of course, rescheduled the trip to London. This time his father would be going with him. "I'm still not sure what to say to him," Jamal admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Robert said, closing the laptop. "Just listen. Absorb. Let your passion for it show. That's what matters." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Jamal, about what happened. We haven't really talked about it." Jamal shrugged, looking out the window at the city lights. "There's not much to say. It happened. You handled it." "I handled the aftermath," Robert corrected gently. "But you were the one who went through it. You were the one who stayed calm. You were the one who had to endure it. I'm proud of you, son, more than you know." "You told me to stay calm," Jamal said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Told me my whole life that my best defense was to be smarter, calmer, and better than they expected. I guess I was listening." "It's a lesson I wish I never had to teach you," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "My job is to build an airline, but my real job is to build a world where you don't need those lessons anymore." That was the core of it, Jamal realized. His father's response hadn't just been about defending his son. It was about defending the son he saw in every young person of color who might one day face their own Karen Miller, their own Officer Donovan. It was about using his immense power to dismantle the very mechanisms that had made such an ordeal possible. Weeks later, on a bleak Tuesday afternoon, a woman in a drab uniform pushed a cart of returned items through the cavernous aisles of a big box store in suburban New Jersey. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face pale and drawn. As she worked, a television on display in the electronics department was playing a national news segment. The anchor's voice filled the air. "And Apex Air, once embroiled in a profiling controversy, today posted its highest ever customer satisfaction scores. The airline's Dignity Promise initiative and its massive investment in the Vance Future Flyers Fund are being hailed as a new gold standard for corporate responsibility. Karen Miller stopped her cart, her eyes fixed on the screen. They were showing a picture of Robert Vance, then one of a smiling Jamal, shaking hands with a university chancellor. Her face, a sour mask of bitterness, contorted. There was no recognition of her own role in this transformation, no self-awareness, only the curdled resentment of a victim of a fate she felt she hadn't deserved. A plane roared overhead, making its final approach to nearby Newark Airport. She glanced up instinctively through the store's grimy skylight. It was an Apex Air jet, its tail fin gleaming in the weak afternoon sun as it ascended toward a new horizon. It was a symbol of a world that had moved on, a world that had judged her, found her wanting, and left her behind on the ground. She turned away from the television, pushed her cart, and disappeared into the endless aisles of discounted merchandise. 2 years passed. The world, with its relentless news cycles and short memory, largely moved on. But for some, the events of that day at Gate B24 were not a fleeting headline. They were a foundational event, a year zero from which a new timeline was drawn. The story of Apex Air's transformation became a case study taught in business schools, a parable of modern corporate accountability. But the truest measure of its impact was not found in boardrooms or lecture halls, but in a small, cramped apartment in the Bronx, where the roar of planes descending into LaGuardia was not a nuisance, but a nightly lullaby. Sofia Rodriguez lived and breathed aviation. Since she was a little girl, she had plastered her walls with posters of cockpits and cutaway diagrams of jet engines, memorizing takeoff velocities and cruising altitudes the way other kids memorize song lyrics. She was a brilliant student, excelling in physics and calculus, but the dream of becoming a pilot felt as distant as the stars the aircraft she idolized flew amongst. The cost of flight school was astronomical, an insurmountable barrier for her family, who worked multiple jobs just to keep the lights on. So she dreamed in private, devouring library books on aerodynamics and spending hours on a free, rudimentary flight simulator on her aging computer. Then one day, her school guidance counselor, a weary but kind woman named Mrs. Gable, called her into her office. On her desk was a glossy brochure. On the cover, the sleek tail fin of an Apex Air jet cut across a blue sky. The words were printed in bold, confident letters. The Vance Future Flyers Fund. Your future is cleared for takeoff. Sofia's heart hammered against her ribs as she read. It was a full-ride scholarship covering the entire cost of flight school, a university degree in aviation management, and a guaranteed internship and mentorship at Apex Air. It was designed specifically for high-achieving students from underprivileged backgrounds. It was, in every sense, the miracle she had stopped allowing herself to pray for. I remember reading about the incident that started this, Mrs. Gable said softly, watching Sofia's wide, disbelieving eyes. It was an ugly story, but sometimes the best things grow from the worst soil. The application process was the most grueling challenge of Sofia's young life. She wrote essays that poured her heart onto the page, describing the symphony of thrust and lift, the magic of a controlled ascent against gravity. She gathered letters of recommendation, submitted her flawless transcripts, and sat for 3 separate interviews with a panel of stern-faced Apex executives and aviation experts. She walked out of the final interview convinced she had failed, that her dream had flown just close enough for her to feel its warmth before banking away forever. A month later, a thick envelope with the Apex Air logo arrived. She opened it with trembling hands. The first word on the letter inside made her knees buckle. Congratulations! 6 months into her freshman year at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, her tuition and board fully paid by the fund, she was flown to New York for her first official mentorship meeting. She was told she would be meeting a junior engineer from the airline's Next Gen Innovation Program, someone to help guide her through the corporate and technical side of the industry. She walked into the designated meeting spot, not a sterile office, but the cavernous expanse of Apex Air's primary maintenance hangar at JFK, feeling a mix of terror and elation. A young man detached himself from a group of mechanics gathered around the massive engine of an Airbus A350. He was tall and wore a simple black polo shirt with the Apex logo. He had a calm, thoughtful expression and kind eyes. "Sophia Rodriguez?" he asked, extending a hand. "I'm Jamal Vance. It's a real pleasure to meet you." Sophia froze, her hand hovering in midair. Vance. The name echoed in her mind. She looked at him again, really looked at him. And she remembered the grainy news photos from 2 years ago. The teenager in the MIT hoodie, his face a mask of quiet shock. You're him," she stammered, feeling a blush creep up her neck. Jamal gave a small, wry smile. "I'm him," he confirmed, "though I'm hoping to be known for a few other things eventually. Come on, let me show you around." As they walked beneath the cathedral-like ceiling of the hangar, dwarfed by the colossal aircraft in various states of repair, a comfortable rapport formed between them. Jamal was no longer the boy from the headlines. He was a confident, articulate university student, just a few years older than her, who spoke about aeronautics with the same passionate fire she felt. He talked about his internship project, developing a more efficient algorithm for calculating cargo weight and balance to save fuel. Finally, as they stood under the wing of a Boeing 787, Sophia found the courage to ask, "Does it bother you," she said quietly, "that your name, that what happened to you, is attached to all this? To me?" Jamal stopped walking and leaned against the fuselage, considering her question. "It used to," he admitted. "For a while I hated it. I felt like the worst day of my life was branded on me. Every time someone mentioned the scholarship, I would just picture that security office, hear that sound." He didn't need to specify which sound. "But then my dad told me something. He said, you can't choose what happens to you, but you have absolute power over what you let it mean." He looked at her, his expression earnest. "What happened to me was about prejudice. It was about shutting a door on someone because of how they look. So my dad, he didn't just open that door back up. He decided to build a whole new airport. This program, you, the dozens of other kids who are going to get their wings because of it, that's the airport. Meeting you today, seeing that you're the real deal, that you have the passion for this that I have, that gives that day a new meaning. It stops being just about my humiliation and starts being about your opportunity. And that's a trade I'll take every single time." Sophia was speechless, moved by his quiet wisdom. "Come on," he said, his tone lightening. "There's one more thing I want to show you." He led her from the hangar to a nearby building, the Apex Air Flight Simulation and Training Center. He badged them into a room that looked like a futuristic arcade, filled with massive white polygonal domes on hydraulic stilts. "This," he said, gesturing to one, "is the A321 Neo Full Motion Simulator. Want to fly it?" Sophia's jaw dropped. Before she could answer, he was leading her up a gantry and into the dome. Inside was a perfect, functioning replica of an A321 cockpit. Jamal spoke to the operator over an intercom, then began flipping switches on the overhead panel. The cockpit whirred to life, screens flickering on, and through the wraparound windows, a hyper-realistic image of JFK's runway 22R appeared. He gestured to the captain's seat. "She's all yours, pilot." With a sense of profound reverence, Sophia slid into the seat. Her hands found the side stick, her fingers brushing the controls she had only ever seen in books. "Okay," Jamal said, talking her through the basics. "Apply takeoff thrust. Gentle pull back on the stick when I tell you. I'll handle the rudder pedals." Sophia pushed the thrust levers forward. A deep, powerful rumble vibrated through the simulator, pressing her back into her seat. The runway markers began to blur. "V1, rotate," Jamal said calmly. Sophia eased back on the stick. With impossible grace, the nose lifted. The ground fell away, and the sprawling map of New York City spread out beneath them. She was flying. Tears welled in her eyes as she banked the aircraft over Jamaica Bay. The Statue of Liberty a tiny speck in the distance. It wasn't a computer game. It was a promise fulfilled. In that moment, she was the legacy. Her flight, born from the ashes of one boy's injustice, was the true and final act of karma. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about creation. It was the beautiful, soaring, and undeniable proof that from the deepest valley of hatred, a new and better horizon could always be reached. The story of Jamal Vance is a stark reminder that injustice, whether in the halls of power or at a crowded airport gate, thrives in silence. But when one person stands up, when a father's love is backed by a CEO's power, the system itself can be forced to change. It's a story of devastating karma, but it's also a story of hope, a testament to the idea that one terrible moment can become the catalyst for 1,000 better tomorrows. The world was changed for the better, not just for Jamal, but for every passenger who will now be treated with the dignity they deserve. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it sparked a desire to see more stories of justice and accountability brought to light, please help us by sharing it. Hit that like button to help the story reach more people, share it with your friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you become part of a community dedicated to telling the stories that matter. Thank you for listening.